Hello, welcome to the Sovereign Magazine show, a transformational experience where conscious conversations meet embodied wisdom. Each episode invites visionary healers, thought leaders, and change makers to share their journeys of awakenings, offering listeners practical tools and soul stirring insights to reclaim their inner authority. We have the incredible Abby Teixeira back for the Cycle Breakers Sacred Boundaries series. And if you missed episodes 1 through 3, please go back. We've talked about everything from healing our inner child while being parents and also sacred grief. So today we're going to be talking about addiction, numbing, and the return to self. So Abby, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for those who aren't familiar with you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm so excited to be back. Our conversations continue to just be so juicy and so life-giving. So I'm a trauma recovery coach and a feminine leadership mentor. I'm also a speaker, I'm a writer, and I'm a mama of four. I work primarily with cycle breakers, so cycle breaking women and femmes, especially those who are healing from trauma, addiction, and survival-based identities. And so these look like healers, coaches, creatives, and leaders who really know that they're meant to be here to use their voice in a bigger way, but find themselves holding themselves back because of, numerous things like fear, self-doubt, perfectionism, invisibility wounds, people pleasing, and really just the stories that they've inherited about who they are allowed to be. And so I truly believe that your medicine is in your story and in your voice. It's just about getting it out there, right? And so this series, we've been really diving deep into what it looks like to be that cycle breaker, to be the truth teller, the one that comes forward and speaks up and names the harm, all of those things. And yeah, I'm really excited to dive into addiction and numbing because that's a personal story for myself. I'm also a survivor of complex PTSD, and I'm in recovery for addiction for almost 12 years now. So this topic is definitely my jam.
Mm. It is my jam as well because I have realized through all of our conversations that I have an addiction to food. And
Mm,
so it doesn't have to be the big, scary drugs, alcohol, sex, those types of things.
mhm,
It can also be something that, is something you have to do every day, which is
mhm.
eating, right?
Yeah.
And so, why don't we start off by defining or helping those recognize when we might be numbing or when we might be using something as a way to numb?
Yeah, I love that you brought up about just kind of what comes to mind when we think about addiction, right? Like oftentimes we think about substances, right? Like especially alcohol, drugs, that kind of a thing. But addiction can really come in so many different forms and shapes and ways. And really, my story was that addiction was really not the problem. It was what the solution that my nervous system really found to survive the pain that I did not know yet how to face. And so many of us are carrying around wounds and pain and traumas and things that have happened to us. And we haven't had the opportunity or the ability or even the capability. We haven't been taught or shown how to process that pain, how to do it in a healthy way. And so many of us, especially in childhood, we pick up, kind of these coping mechanisms or coping strategies to survive what we are currently moving through. And oftentimes those coping mechanisms are not really healthy, right? They are literally just to survive. And so for myself, it really started off as drinking around age 14. By the time I got sober when I was 29, alcohol had really become my primary coping mechanism. And I spent 15 years numbing, which was really what the whole purpose of the consumption of that substance was for me, was just to not feel, not to think about, not to deal with all the things, all the grief, all the pain, all the trauma that I had been carrying pretty much all of my life, right? And so on the outside, I looked very functional. I went to school, I got my nursing degree, I got married, I was traveling, all of those things, but I was really, really suffering in silence. I was suffering behind closed doors and really using alcohol deeply as a way to really cope with that pain that I had been carrying. And it wasn't until I kind of hit that rock bottom moment for me, which was 12 years ago, when I ended up in jail for the second time, that I really decided to look at that pain finally. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know how to even go about that. I just knew that the life that I was living up until that point was really leading me to somewhere really scary. And I really felt I was playing with fire. And so that's what really humbled me enough to finally seek help. And, that's how my journey began. And in my journey in the last 12 years, I've really come across so many. Let me put it this way. I don't think I can honestly say that I have worked with someone that doesn't have some sort of addiction, whether it is, and by addiction, I mean something that they are using to soothe, to numb, to cope with the things that they are carrying. And like you mentioned, it could be something like food, it could be gambling, it could be shopping, it could be our social media, it could be our phones, just something to take us away from our bodies so that we can move through whatever it is that we're experiencing in life, whether we're parents or educators or in jobs, whatever is the case. We just need that thing to just kind of temporarily take us away from the mountain that we are really carrying, which is for many of us our story.
Yeah. And it's so true. I mean, everybody's addiction is different. I mean, my brother has had his long-term addictions with many different substances. Like I said, mine is food, and I think mine comes from a space of like lack and scarcity when food wasn't available. And,
Mm.
it comes with this level of discomfort. So it is my comfort to go to when I'm nervous or scared or stressed, whatever it is. That's the first thing I'm going to do is munch on something, right? And so I love that you were talking about the disconnection from ourselves because
Mm.
for me, that was the hardest part is to begin to
Mm.
reconnect to myself. 6 years
Mm.
ago, when I started on this journey, I didn't know the woo-woo world existed at all. Nobody in my world ever was woo-woo. I'm the first person. But I found it so absolutely fascinating, and I realized that disconnection. However, I didn't have anybody to say to me, really, like, you're disconnected. First of all, nobody told me
Mhm.
that, but these are the steps that you take, or this is what it might feel like. I had no baseline. And so for somebody who is saying, well, maybe I have an addiction to shopping, or maybe I have an addiction to
Mhm.
smoking, or whatever it may be, they're numbing in some sort of way. What do you usually recommend to your clients and how they can begin that reconnection process?
Mhm. Well, like I had mentioned earlier, Um, when I removed the substance and I really got clear around kind of what was underneath that pain, what was the things that I was carrying, right? It really revealed to me there's a lot of childhood trauma. There was abuse, there was the shame that came with all of that experience, the grief, the loneliness, the complex PTSD. And something that I really want to name is that for many of us, when we finally come to terms that we are using something in an unhealthy way to really cope or to numb, um, you know, we can kind of tend to slip into that shame thinking that we're weak, right? It's because we're weak. Or I've even heard people say, oh, you have no willpower. Why don't you just stop? Those kind of things, right? And it wasn't that I was addicted because I was weak. It was because I was really hurting, right? And so, what is the source of the pain? Where is the hurt coming from? When we can finally uncover that, and obviously, there's a deep sacred process that for me personally, that I take my clients through to be able to uncover those wounds in a way that's not like re-triggering, that is like re-traumatizing, that kind of thing, but really taking the step back and with guidance, because I definitely did not do all this by myself. This was with a deep support, sacred containers, people who were incredible that came into my world that were able to help me see what was underneath the addiction and was able to help me name the pain that was beneath that. Once I was able to really name that, then we can break it apart, right? That's when we can actually start to look deeper and start to move through these things, and then we start to learn different ways to be able to cope with these things, because it's not like suddenly I remove the substance, suddenly all my pain and shame and all those things are going to be going away. They're not going to just disappear. And in fact, life has actually thrown at me even crazier things in my last 12 years than I would have even imagined. But the difference now is that I know that if I'm searching and seeking for something to numb, it's like an alarm bell kind of goes off for me, and I'm like, okay, what's happening here, right? I'm feeling some pain. What can I do here that is actually like a strategy or a coping mechanism that's a healthy way of processing it, right? And so I think it's really important to kind of demystify and yeah, destigmatize, what addiction can mean to many of us, because it's a pretty powerful word when you hear addiction, right? It's an adaptation, it's not a failure. And I really want people to know that it's not a lack of willpower. It's not that you're making bad choices or you're a moral failure, those kind of things, because these are things that I used to tell myself, right? It really is an adaptation, it's a coping strategy, it's a survival response. And so it's about not questioning what's wrong with you, but instead asking, what happened to you? Hey, like, what's going on? What happened to you? Right? Rather than trying to pathologize and diagnose, like, what's wrong with you. Right. And so for me, that was like I mentioned, the childhood abuse, the living in fear, the walking on eggshells, the learning to disconnect from my body. And so kind of circling back to what you had mentioned, that too was a survival mechanism, to before the alcohol or the substance came into place. I used to deeply dissociate. That was a way to leave my body, to disconnect from myself, because I didn't feel safe with the emotions and the memories and the things that were coming up for me. And so alcohol became that relief, that escape, that temporary freedom at the time. And before that, there were other mechanisms that I actually had picked up that were not healthy, right? Eating disorders, violence, even, anger, like just like really dangerous kind of anger, those kind of things that I really like kind of, yeah, just kind of lean towards to get that temporary relief. But alcohol was the ultimate for me because it literally created, like, I would black out, right? So I wouldn't feel anything, think about anything, and even the next day, right? So it was that really powerful substance that allowed me to fully escape myself for that temporary time, right? And so the reconnection portion has been the work these last 12 years, is learning how to, first of all, reconnect with myself, start naming the things and the harm in a safe way, and then finding other things to replace these unhealthy coping mechanisms that I had picked up along the way.
Mm. You talked about the pain, and
Mhm,
I want to ask this in a way that makes sense, but I think you'll get the gist of what I'm saying.
mhm,
When you stopped numbing, right?
mhm,
You obviously had to feel this pain on such a deeper level, but how were you able to train your nervous system from like saying these feelings are too dangerous for me to I need to explore these more because these are the medicines that my body needs, if you will.
mhm.
Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I can think of this really powerful experience I had early on in recovery. And then so I'll share the story briefly and then what I took away from that and why this was so powerful for me. So probably year one or two into my healing and recovery journey, my grandmother passed away. And she was somebody that was very, very important in my life. I was very close with her. She was a very important person in my life. So, and she lived far away. She lived abroad, and it was sudden. It happened suddenly. So we were not expecting it. We were just shocked. And, it was one of those things that in the moment, I had no idea how I was going to move through that pain. Because not only was I in pain, but my whole family was. And watching my mom, whose mom that was, how she took that news was gut wrenching for me. And I remember vividly, it was my husband and I, it was just the two of us. We didn't have kids at the time. And we were in our condo. And I got the news and I talked to my mom briefly. She could barely even, kind of communicate what had happened. And when I got off the phone, I just felt this incredible pain, incredible pain. And I remember crying to my husband and saying, like, I need a drink. Like, I need a drink right now. And he just looked at me. And, it had been a couple of years at that time of my journey, right? And he's like, are you sure? And I was like, yes. Like, I said it like convictedly, And I remember I just started like sobbing uncontrollably. And he just held me. He just held me and supported me. And we fell asleep on the couch together with me sobbing in his arms, basically. And I remember when I woke up the next morning, because I literally didn't wake up until the next morning, it was like I had survived a storm, literally. Like I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, like it all came flooding back to me, what the news I had just remembered, all of that kind of stuff, the pain. But honestly, like it felt like I had kind of went through that initial like storm, like tsunami of a wave that kind of hit me. And it was the first time where I actually felt like, wow, I'm on the other side of that, and I survived that without the drink. Right. And so for me, what was really powerful is having somebody that was so safe for me, somebody who knew me, somebody that could hold me and not try to rush in and fix or judge or calm me down or anything like that for what I was saying in my grief and in my pain. Right. And so really what has been so instrumental was finding the right supports and finding the right modalities or whatever is the case, like tools, resources to be able to move through the things that come up when we are healing, like the grief, the anger, the shame, the rage, the loneliness, the confusion, all of those things. Because like I said, just because I removed the substance from my life doesn't mean that everything was rainbows and fairy tales, right? I was still hit with lots of things. But again, I was no longer giving me the giving myself the choice to really turn to those old coping mechanisms. I now had different coping strategies and tools and resources. And in that moment, all I needed was to be held and witnessed and not my husband to like try to come in and fix and do all these things. He just acknowledged. He's like, "Are you sure that's what you want?" And I was like, "Yes." And he knew, that I was speaking from pain. And he just held me, literally held me through that moment until that initial grief. And I could kind of think a little bit more clearly, the next morning, and I can make a better, more informed, more clear headed choice in that moment. Right. And so that was one example of how when these things come up, I could have chosen something different. I could have went to somebody who maybe I would have known that they would have given in to that. They would have been like, "Oh, that's what you want? Sure. Here, let's have a drink together." That kind of a thing, right? Because I was with my partner who I knew he knows me very well. He knew the journey I had been on. He knew that this was not something how hard I had fought to get on the other side of that initial addiction, that he really was able to be that person for me in that moment and just hold me through that painful experience until I could. And that really taught me that I could actually survive deeply painful experiences without numbing it, fully
Mm,
feeling it, fully
mm,
feeling it. Mhm.
mm. I love this example so much because my biological mother was a bad drug addict and alcoholic. And I always wondered if when she passed, if that would help my brother who has struggled with addiction, because she was always his enabler. Anytime he needed something, she'd get it for him, right?
Mhm.
And she started very young feeding him drugs. I'll just say that. As far as I
Mhm.
can remember, I don't think I was ever in that equation, but who
Mhm.
who knows? I'd probably
Yeah.
have to go through hypnosis or something to try to remember. I was so young
Yeah.
because she left when I was 6 months old. But it reminded me of once she did pass, it didn't help. My biological parents actually passed 12 days apart of different,
Wow.
they weren't in the same town. Biological mother passed first and my father passed 12 days later. So soul
Mm.
contract, right?
Mm.
And
Okay.
so unfortunately my brother was incarcerated at that time. So he didn't get
Mm.
to say goodbye to either of them.
Mm.
And it makes me think about his recovery. He is currently sober. Yes, I hope that stays for him. But
Mm.
it made me think about this part of how do you hold compassion for yourself for that old version of you that did need to numb, right? Now
Yeah.
you're 12 years
Mhm.
past
Mhm.
that person, and who you are today, I'm sure is nothing like that person back then because I am not the same person I was even 3 months ago.
Yeah.
But how do you continue to hold compassion for her
Mm.
while, because from my experience, every day is a choice. At any moment, we could pick up our addictions, right?
Mhm.
And so every day continues to be a choice. And so therefore there's that part of us, we talk about the inner child or we talk about, the little girl or our higher self. Like I really feel like there's this addiction part of ourselves that we need to talk to
Mhm.
sometimes. And so
Mhm.
how do you hold compassion for her?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Oh, and like literally just yesterday, I had to kind of journey with myself to really meet myself with so much. love and compassion because an old pattern was coming up for me that was very painful. And it was really profound how I was able to really kind of almost witness me spiraling and almost like by default settings going back to these old ways that I used to speak to myself, these old ways that I used to kind of operate in my day-to-day life.
Mhm.
And what really has been a big game changer for me is changing my relationship with pain. Because really, when I think about, addiction or numbing, anything that I spent years trying to avoid, the alcohol wasn't about hiding my pain. It was really postponing my relationship with it. Right. And so we have to learn to develop a relationship with pain because it's a fact of life. It is life. Right. We will experience pain in one way, shape, or form. And so it's been everything to really learn to first of all acknowledge, when the pain is showing up, right? And then what is behind that pain? What's really happening here? And when I think about the old versions of myself that had no guidance, no blueprint, no mentors, no supports, no resources, I was literally on my own to kind of figure this pain thing all out on my own. So I literally did the best that I could with what I had in that time. And unfortunately, a lot of what I had was not healthy. It wasn't safe. It actually brought even more pain for me in those instances, right? So when I think about that old version of me and how much she fought to be here, and she didn't always do it right. She didn't always, God knows the amount of times that I got myself in trouble and all of those things, right? I really, really have learned to like really meet myself with so much love and compassion. And because I can meet myself in that way, I can meet others now with that deep love, care, kindness, and compassion, looking at them where they are. Maybe they're me 10 years ago, right? Maybe they're me 12 years ago. Maybe they're me, like you mentioned, 3 months ago, right? And because I'm currently always constantly overcoming and working through and learning new things about myself and learning new ways to hold the pain and move through it in a safe way, I'm able to then show up in that way and hold that space for others as they are starting to come back and reconnect with themselves, their body, their voice, their truth, all of those kind of things, right? And I have a really, really beautiful healing relationship with the younger versions of myself, right? And where there was a time when I used to shame her and avoid her and all of the things, now it's like, no, like I really appreciate it because if it wasn't for her and the things that she did in those times, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here today. Even though it wasn't the right way or, the right way of
Mhm.
getting here, she took
Mhm.
different pathways. I can really, really see myself for what it was like in those times and what I did, in those times to really move through that without any of the supports or resources that I now so gratefully have.
You said something so profound that will always stick with me now as this call is that you were postponing the pain. And that is so incredibly moving because
Mm,
that is exactly what's happening is the numbing doesn't take the pain away. It just postpones it for that moment in time. And then when the numbing is gone, it's still there. So when we do the work, when we make the time to invest in ourselves and heal those wounds, the wounds will still be there, but the pain may be just a little bit less, or you can alchemize that pain in a new way for something that is more presence that you choose instead of it being so hurtful. And I really appreciate that line so much because when somebody is in the addictive state, they think that they can't survive without the numbing, right?
mhm, mhm,
But what they're not realizing, and I always think about this because somebody said it to me before. If you stuff down pain and you think of it like a little buoy in the water, if you push it down, it pops right back up again, right? It's the same type of concept. It's going to pop back up and it's probably going to be much more ugly than the last time because it really wants to be seen and heard. And so I always think of my pain like that because you're right. It just postpones it when we're not looking at it. And
mm,
one thing I have learned from my brother is he said to me one time when he was sober previously, he said, nobody can help me. I have to want to help myself. And that relieved the pressure from me of like, I can be supportive. I can do all the things that I would normally do, but it's ultimately up to him to make the choices, right?
Mhm.
And if he wants to postpone the pain, then he can, right? And that's
Yeah.
his choice. And I don't have a say in that. And so as we start to part ways today, do you have any closing statements that you would like to say to somebody who might be watching?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, recovery isn't a destination because I'm not, I can't stand here and say I'm fully recovered because I'm not. I'm constantly healing. I'm constantly recovering. It really is the relationship, right? So do I choose myself today? You know, do I choose regulating my nervous system? Do I ask for support? Do I honor those emotions? Right. And really we talked about this a lot today. You know, we can't heal what we continue to numb. And so it's always going to be there, whatever it is that we are trying to numb, trying to run away from, trying to escape, it's going to be there. Right. And so if you're listening today and you're struggling with addiction in any form of numbing, I just really want you to know and take away from our conversation today that your coping mechanisms are not proof that you're broken. They're really evidence that you've been trying to survive, right? And healing really begins the moment that you start to realize that you deserve more than just survival. You deserve to thrive. And there's so many of us out there who are truly thriving through the survival, right? And that, yeah, we do recover. There is hope. And yeah, I'm more than happy to always have a conversation like this with anyone who's struggling.
I love that. Well, if you want to connect with Abby, she's in our community, community.sovereign-magazine.com. All her details will be in the show notes. We're going to be back for some more. What will we be talking about? Oh, women of color in recovery, reclaiming space in healing worlds not built for us. I wouldn't say us, meaning me, but for women of color, my daughter is mixed, so that includes her, and it's a deep topic
Beautiful.
for me. So definitely come back if you're liking these episodes. Definitely hit that button as we appreciate that. And we will see you on the next one. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.